As I've mentioned in a number of the episodes of this series, especially ones where we discuss race cars in particular, it really doesn't take that much to cause a vehicle which could have been legendary or brilliant at what it was intended for to fade into obscurity or, in a comparative way, fail at what it was designed for. Although the car isn't necessarily a failure, it was just a sufferer of circumstance. That's happened to a number of teams and a number of cars over the years. Consider a team like Toyota, for instance, at the Le Mans. In the late 90s with the TS20 GT1, they almost became the second Japanese manufacturer to win the race after Mazda did it in 1991, but they had a tyre blowout. Then, again, much more recently, the TS50 hybrid, also from Toyota, had a mechanical failure catastrophically close to the end of the race. So it can be something as simple as that, which just takes the victory away from certain vehicles. And it's a shame when that happens. It's not a shame for the other teams, of course, but it's a shame for those. That, to some degree, is the unfortunate history of this car. A Chevy Corvette, which is pretty obvious. It's a third generation or C3 Corvette. It was built in 1976, raced in 1976, and it was intended to be raced at three major events: the Le Mans 24-hour race, the Daytona 24-hour race, and the Sebring 12-hour race. Now, the car had some issues even before it got to the Le Mans. It didn't arrive and didn't compete on time in the Daytona event at all. It managed to get just into the Sebring event, but suffered a crash, and then for the Le Mans itself, they needed a replacement vehicle. The owner of the car, who was invited to the event by the French government because of a lot of teams drawing out from the oil crisis at the time, was rumoured to be paid around $50,000 to show up at the event in the car. So they rearranged things, they got the car to the event, and it was really promising. Because this car, as you can kind of tell from its looks, is a monster. It doesn't just have that crazy body kit for no reason. This is no Need for Speed creation, that's for sure. This car is powered by a 600 cubic inch, that's 9.8 litre V8, which is claimed, probably quite conservatively, to be putting out around 700 horsepower. That is entirely believable. For a 9.8 litre racing American V8, yeah, I believe that they put out probably that much, maybe even more, and a number of the people who raced the car and drove it said that it definitely felt like it had a lot more. Now, in that 1976 Le Mans, it managed to actually qualify in 9th place. So that's pretty good for a vehicle which you probably wouldn't assume would be the best around corners. Now, of course, back then, the La Sarthe circuit, which is where the Le Mans is held, did not have, at that time at least, the two chicanes on the Honaudière straight, which is the longest straight, or was back then, on the La Sarthe circuit. So back then, this car was capable of hitting in excess of 225 miles per hour. That's pretty insane for a vehicle like this. I mean, it's more aerodynamic than it would usually be, but it still doesn't look like the most aerodynamic thing around. But it was fast. Sheer power and torque allowed the car to punch through the competition in a straight line, and even in the race itself, it was doing really well. But as I alluded to earlier on, there was failure. In particular, a tyre blowout, just like with Toyota in the late 90s, and various other cars as well from different years, and unfortunately that led to the car finishing 49th overall. But at the end of the day, at least it did finish the event. Now, one of the interesting things about this car, and you do of course have to factor in that the chicanes weren't present back then, so the speeds that you could get to were much higher, plus the cars were generally geared to have much higher top speeds than they are now. This car qualified with a 354 lap. In 2015, the LMP1 cars in the modern version of the Le Mans circuit were also doing 354 laps. In fact, the best lap in the 2015 Le Mans was a 354 lap. This car did that in 1976. So this is a perfect vehicle, really, for naysayers of American classic cars, or muscle cars, if you want to look at it that way. It's very vaguely a muscle car in that sense. It's more just a classic sports car, really, with a very muscle car-esque engine. But still, it just goes to show how competitive even really, really old-school American cars can be. Personally, I've always been a fan of classic American cars, modern ones as well, although not as much on the modern side of things. But Overall, the car had massive potential, massive power, and certainly massive performance, and to be taken down by something as simple as a tyre blowout really was a shame. And I was actually fortunate enough to see this car in person at the Goodwood Festival of Speed, and I'll put some footage of that in the video so that you can hear what this monster sounds like. So overall, it's a car which isn't talked about enough, and it did kind of inspire one of the series on this very channel, Spirit of Le Mans. Incidentally, the livery on the car was changed to Spirit of Le Mans. Previously, it was labelled Spirit of Sebring. And overall, it's just such an interesting car with an interesting history and some pretty incredible performance. So overall, if you enjoyed this particular installment and want to check out more, of course you can click through to see the full list of episodes in this series so far. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.